The impact of Robert Harrison's fist felt like a sledgehammer, snapping my head to the side with brutal force. A sickening crack reverberated through the mansion's grand living room, instantly silencing the festive chatter and gentle Christmas carols. For a suspended moment, the world went mute. 50 pairs of eyes, a sea of Boston's elite, were fixed on me, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The lights on the 10-foot Christmas tree continued to sparkle, a garish counterpoint to the warm blood now trickling from my nose. "You clumsy oaf!" Robert's roar filled the opulent room, which was lavishly decorated with gold garlands and priceless crystal. "Look what you've done! This shirt is worth more than your entire monthly income." The water I'd accidentally spilled was creating a small puddle on the imported Italian marble floor. A single glass of water, the result of a minor stumble as I passed behind his armchair. "My name is Joseph. I'm 32, and I've just been floored by my wife's father in front of the crème de la crème of Boston society at the annual Harrison Christmas Gala." I gingerly touched my nose, already feeling the cartilage begin to swell. The coppery tang of blood flooded my mouth as I scanned the stunned faces for Michelle, my wife. There she was, by the massive fireplace, a vision in her $1,000 red dress. But her face held no horror at the assault I'd just endured. It held shame. Shame. For me. "Joseph." Her voice was as glacial as the December air whipping outside. "You owe my father an apology. Now." Her words struck me with more force than the physical blow. Around me, whispers erupted like a spreading plague. Lawyers, doctors, financiers, all scrutinizing the bricklayer who had dared to marry the Harrison princess. "Michelle," I started, my voice raspy. "Apologize," she enunciated, her tone condescending, as if correcting a disobedient child. "Or leave my home." Robert crossed his arms, the damp spot on his crisp white shirt serving as the evidence of my supposed crime. The cruel, triumphant smirk on his face was a confession. This had never been about the water. It was a raw display of power, a brutal lesson in putting me back in my place. I surveyed the room one last time. No one moved. Not a single guest challenged the actions of a 60-year-old man assaulting another over a spilled drink. They were merely spectators, waiting to see if I would grovel or retreat with what little dignity I had left. For 3 years, I had swallowed every thinly veiled insult, every condescending joke about my trade, every look of disdain. I had always believed Michelle would be my champion when it truly counted. I had believed our love was more valuable than her family's fortune. I was profoundly mistaken. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand, my gaze locked onto Robert's. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then, in a move that defied all their expectations, I let a slow smile spread across my face. "You're right," I said, my voice unexpectedly firm. "This is no place for me." And with that, I turned and walked away. No backward glance, no dramatic exit. I simply headed for the door, the sounds of their collective surprise trailing behind me. They were oblivious to the fact that for the last 6 months, I had been meticulously preparing for this exact confrontation. CTA, Call to Action 1. If you're hooked on this tale of betrayal and want to witness the payback that's about to unfold, make sure you're subscribed. Because as I navigated the snow-dusted streets of Boston, they couldn't possibly imagine the Christmas gift I had wrapped up just for them. The 20-minute drive to my modest house in Somerville was a blur of focused thought. The metallic taste in my mouth was a dull annoyance, but it was the memory of our beginning that truly stung. Robert Harrison was a man born on third base who believed he'd hit a triple. At 62, he presided over a real estate empire his father and grandfather had built, yet he carried himself as if he'd laid every brick. His arrogance was boundless, particularly towards working-class people like myself. 3 years prior, when Michelle and I began our relationship, he tolerated me as a rebellious fuzz for his pampered daughter. But when she proposed to me, Robert had laughed openly. "You honestly think you can provide her the life she's accustomed to by building bathrooms for the middle class?" he'd sneered, pouring a whiskey that cost more than my weekly earnings. Michelle had defended me then, insisting that she loved me, that she wanted to build an authentic life with me. But Robert was relentless. He was a master at sowing seeds of discontent, subtle jabs at family dinners, remarks about my lack of sophistication during conversations about investments or European holidays, lavish gifts for Michelle that he knew were far beyond my means, a $15,000 handbag, a $20,000 necklace. Slowly, I watched Michelle transform. She started to question my ambition, my refusal to accept a substantial loan from Robert, my insistence on doing things the hard way. "Your pride gets in the way, Joseph," became her frequent refrain. Accepting help isn't a weakness, it's just being smart. But I knew Robert Harrison's brand of help came with invisible strings, destined to become chains. The turning point was 6 months ago, at Michelle's birthday. Robert had rented out an entire Back Bay restaurant, inviting 50 guests from his exclusive circle. I was in my one and only suit, a clearance rack find, surrounded by men in attire that cost more than my truck. During his toast, Robert praised Michelle for following her heart, but added a hope that she would eventually find a partner more on her level. The crowd chuckled. Michelle just smiled. That evening, I started my preparations. It wasn't about revenge, not initially. It was about bracing for the inevitable. Men like Robert Harrison don't quit until they win. I began methodically. A separate bank account, digital copies of crucial documents, recorded conversations. I dove into the public records of the Harrison family businesses, their city contracts, their partnerships. As a contractor, I'd spent over a decade navigating the city's bureaucracy. I knew inspectors, engineers, and clerks, the very people Robert saw as insignificant, but who knew precisely where the bodies were buried. 3 weeks ago, I found a pattern in the city archives. Harrison projects receiving approvals against all odds, bids won by suspiciously narrow margins, and building codes that seemed to bend for his developments. 2 days after that discovery, Michelle came home wanting to discuss our future. She was tired of the family friction, she said, questioning our long-term compatibility. Her words were her own, but the script was pure Robert Harrison. Now, sitting in my own kitchen, dabbing the last of the dried blood from my face, I understood. The war had been declared long ago. I had just been a non-combatant, until tonight. I opened my laptop to a folder innocuously labeled Home Projects. Within it, a series of subfolders with deceptively bland names: Beacon Hill Irregularities, Municipal Contract Queries, Inspector Relations, and a fourth, as yet unopened, titled Plan B, Contingency. It was finally time. Just as I was about to click, my phone rang. Michelle. "Joseph, you have to come back. Now my father wants to see you." Her tone was strange, laced with fear. "He knows things, Joseph. Things that could ruin you." I ended the call and smiled. Robert Harrison thought he had leverage on me. How quaint. In a matter of hours, the entire city would have leverage on him. 20 minutes later, I strode back into the Harrison mansion, not as a shamed outcast, but as a man who had chosen his battlefield. Robert was in the library, a fresh whiskey in hand, a manila folder resting on the mahogany desk. Michelle stood beside him, her eyes puffy and red. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "Sit down, Joseph," Robert said, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "We have things to discuss." I remained standing, crossing my arms. I would wait. "Did you honestly believe I wouldn't uncover your little scheme?" He opened the folder, scattering photographs across the polished wood. Pictures of me, entering and leaving municipal buildings, speaking with inspectors, photographing public records. 3 months of snooping on my family. Quite the project for a simple bricklayer. Michelle finally looked at me. "Joseph, why? Why were you spying on my father?" The disappointment in her voice was almost comical. After all I had endured, I was the one who had let her down. "Because, Michelle," I replied evenly, "your family has been plotting against me for months, and I am not a fool." Robert slammed his fist on the desk. "You're a leech, an opportunist who saw my daughter as a meal ticket." "Dad, stop," Michelle pleaded, but he silenced her with a sharp look. "Quiet, Michelle. You've done enough damage by marrying this parasite." He turned back to me, eyes blazing with hatred. "But your little game ends now." He laid out his trap with relish. His private investigator had unearthed some minor tax violations from my early days. Unreported cash jobs I'd taken to make ends meet. "My lawyers have been notified," he gloated, sliding papers toward me. "An anonymous tip will be filed with the IRS in the morning, complete with evidence of your illicit activities." Michelle buried her face in her hands. "Dad, this is too much." "Too much?" he bellowed. "This man tried to ruin us. He'll deserve every day he gets." But there was more. Through his influence with the contractors' union, he would have me blacklisted from every major site in Boston. My license would be revoked, my business annihilated. "And after you're behind bars," he continued, savoring the words, "Michelle will be free to marry someone of her station. Thomas Whitman has expressed considerable interest. His family's construction firm is the second largest in the state." And there it was. This was never just about getting me out. It was about a strategic merger. I looked at Michelle, searching for a spark of defiance, a shred of loyalty to our vows. I found only weary resignation. "Joseph," she said softly, Perhaps this is for the best. We were never going to work, were we? Our worlds are just too different." Her words were the final blow. 3 years of shared life, dismissed without a fight. Robert's smile was one of pure triumph. "See? Even she knows you don't belong." In that instant, something within me shifted. The rage I had so carefully contained now had a singular focus. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about justice. "Have you both concluded your performance?" I inquired, my voice even. Robert blinked, surprised by my composure. "What?" I asked if the theatrics were over. I stepped forward and picked up a photo of myself leaving City Hall. "Because now it's my turn." I sank into the leather armchair opposite them, crossed my legs, and offered my second smile of the evening. "Robert, you were right about one thing. I am more than just a bricklayer. For the past 6 months, I became a student of your business, a forensic investigator, if you will." I pulled out my phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. It showed an email draft, subject line, "Comprehensive dossier, Harrison Development Corp." His face went pale. "You see, while you wasted resources digging up my minor past infractions, I was meticulously documenting your present-day felonies." I opened another file. "Fraudulent contracts, bid rigging, bribery of public officials. It's all here, documented, recorded, and corroborated by 3 independent sources." Michelle shot up from her chair. "Joseph, what are you talking about?" "I'm saying, Michelle, that your father isn't just a cutthroat businessman. He's a career criminal." I showed her another file. "And tomorrow morning, when he files his anonymous tip about me, this entire dossier gets delivered to the Boston Globe, the Herald, and the FBI." Robert lunged for my phone, but I moved it out of his reach. "Ah, no, Robert. This is just a copy. The originals are on 12 different devices and cloud servers you couldn't access with a federal warrant." The only sound in the library was the ticking of the grandfather clock. "You wouldn't dare," Robert rasped, but the bravado was gone from his voice. I rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the perfectly sculpted gardens. "You know the difference between you and me, Robert." I turned to face him. "You thought you were dealing with an inferior. Your fatal flaw was in underestimating the man you dismissed as a simple bricklayer." I let the silence hang for a moment. "You have until noon tomorrow. Withdraw every threat against me and issue a public apology for your actions tonight. If you fail to do so..." I paused, letting him absorb the gravity of the situation. "Well, let's just say, this Christmas is about to become infamous for the entire city of Boston." Leaving the Harrison mansion, I drove directly to my lawyer's office, despite the late hour. David Chun wasn't just my lawyer. He was an old friend with a visceral hatred for the kind of corruption the Harrisons embodied. "Joseph," he said, opening the door in his robe. "For God's sake, what time is it?" "It's time to end the Harrison dynasty." For the next hour, I laid out the fruits of my 6-month investigation on his conference table. This was a methodical, cross-referenced case file detailing every crime at Harrison Development. My real advantage, I explained, was my network. The city's invisible people, whom Robert had always treated with contempt. Tommy Moretti, the chief building inspector, owed me a favor that gave me access to 5 years of Harrison project records. The pattern was glaring: safety violations ignored, codes bent, always by the same handful of inspectors. Sarah O'Connor, in the city bidding department, showed me the proof of bid rigging. Harrison's submissions arriving at the last second, undercutting competitors by impossibly precise margins. But the linchpin was Marcus Webb, a former Harrison accountant fired for asking too many questions. Marcus had provided me with the smoking gun, evidence of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and systematic tax fraud. For 6 months, I had verified every claim, every document. I didn't want to wound Robert. I wanted to bury him. David finished his review, looking at me with a mix of awe and trepidation. "Joseph, this isn't just dynamite. This is a nuclear warhead. You have enough here for a federal indictment." He paused. "But they are powerful. They will try to crush you before this ever sees a courtroom." As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Michelle. "Joseph, my father has hired the top legal firm in Boston. He's suing you for defamation, corporate espionage. He has connections everywhere, Joseph. The FBI, the police." Her voice was trembling with panic. "Michelle," I said calmly, "your father is a federal criminal. He's the one who should be afraid." "You don't get it," she shrieked. "He won't stop. He'll plant evidence, buy witnesses. He will make you regret the day you were born." That was the moment I understood. The Harrisons weren't just corrupt. They were dangerous. I hung up and looked at David. "Change of plans. We're not going to let them control the narrative. We go public. Now." David raised an eyebrow. "What's the play?" "Do you have Jennifer Walsh's number at the Globe and Marcus Thompson at Channel 5? Joseph, what are you doing?" I smiled for the 3rd time that day, a grim, determined smile. "Robert Harrison wanted a war. He's about to get one. Fought on my terms, with my weapons, on my schedule." I began composing a series of text messages. CTA, Call to Action 2. If you're on the edge of your seat watching this high-stakes chess match between a working man and a corrupt dynasty, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss a single move of this historic takedown. The first message went to Jennifer Walsh. "I have the story that will dismantle one of Boston's largest corruption rings." The second to Marcus Thompson. "Interested in the exclusive that will define your career?" The third went to FBI Special Agent Rodriguez, an old contact. "Remember you told me to call if I ever found anything big? I have something." David watched me, a new respect in his eyes. "Are you certain about this, Joseph? Once you release this, there's no going back." I looked out at the snow falling softly, blanketing the city in a deceptively pure white. David, 3 years ago, I thought I was joining a family. I discovered I'd married into a criminal enterprise that saw me as disposable. I turned back to him, closing my briefcase. Robert Harrison thinks he can bully me into submission. Michelle thinks I can be bought off or cast aside. They both fundamentally misjudged the man they were dealing with. And by sunrise, all of Boston is going to learn exactly who the Harrisons really are. At 2 a.m., I left David's office. The first calls would start in 4 hours. The Rubicon had been crossed. At 6 a.m. on December 26th, the symphony of Robert Harrison's downfall began. My phone rang precisely on schedule. Joseph, Jennifer Walsh, Boston Globe. I've been up all night with your dossier. This is bigger than the Harrisons. That's the idea, Jennifer, I said, taking a sip of coffee. Simultaneously, a text from Marcus Thompson buzzed. Lead story at 7. Crew is already outside Harrison HQ. The third call was the most gratifying. Agent Rodriguez, his voice urgent. Joseph, this is solid gold. We're getting warrants signed now. The raids begin in 2 hours. While I orchestrated the collapse of an empire from my kitchen, Robert was in a desperate scramble. Michelle called at 7:15, hysterical. Joseph, the FBI is here. They have warrants for everything. Dad is screaming that you fabricated it all. Michelle, I said coolly, tell your father he has 30 minutes before the press conference starts. If he has a statement, now would be the time. She sobbed and hung up. At 8 a.m., I watched on television as Marcus Thompson reported live from outside the Harrison Development Building, federal agents carrying out box after box of evidence. My phone rang again. It was Robert, his voice a ragged mess. Joseph, you're destroying innocent people. Michelle is not a part of this. Robert, you had your chance to be a man yesterday. You chose threats. I'll pay you. Name your price. 1 million. 2. The wire transfer can be done instantly. The bribe attempt was the final nail. Keep talking, Robert. This call is being recorded. I hung up and immediately dialed Agent Rodriguez. You'll want this recording. He just offered me $2 million to make this go away. By 9 a.m., it was a national story. But Robert had one last, desperate play. At 10:30, Michelle appeared at my door, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. Joseph, these are my father's lawyers. They have an offer. I let them in. The lead attorney was smooth. Mr. Mason, my client is prepared to make amends. He's offering $3 million, an executive position, and a public apology. I feigned consideration. And in return, you retract your statements, claim you misinterpreted the documents, and this all goes away. Michelle looked at me, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Joseph, please, we can fix this. I know I was wrong. She genuinely believed our life together had a price tag. Gentlemen, I said, standing, there's a fundamental flaw in your proposal. I walked to my window. You're operating under the assumption that this is merely about tax fraud. You haven't grasped the full scope. I turned to them. Robert Harrison didn't just rig bids. He laundered money for organized crime through his construction projects. There are ties to cartels who used his properties as hubs. The color drained from their faces. The dossier the FBI has is over 600 pages. The press has only seen the introduction. You can't prove that, the lawyer stammered. I smiled for the last time that day. I have 700 hours of audio, bank records from 12 countries, and statements from 43 witnesses. I retrieved a final folder from my desk. And I have these. I opened it to reveal photos of Robert meeting with 2 known international criminals, men on the FBI's most wanted list. So, no, gentlemen, $3 million won't cover it. In fact, I checked my watch. In approximately 15 minutes, a second federal team will be arresting Robert on RICO charges. And you two, having just attempted to bribe me on his behalf, are now accessories. They scrambled out the door. Michelle remained, tears carving paths down her cheeks. "Who are you?" she whispered, looking at me as if I were a complete stranger. "The Joseph you knew, Michelle, ceased to exist on Christmas Eve when he was betrayed by the two people he trusted most," I said, holding the door open. "The man you see now is the one who understands that you don't fight monsters with polite requests." She left. 15 minutes later, I watched on the news as Robert Harrison was led from his mansion in handcuffs. It wasn't victory I felt. It was a profound, quiet peace, but this was only the beginning of the reckoning. 6 months after Robert Harrison's arrest, I was on the porch of my new home on Martha's Vineyard, watching the sunset. The irony was not lost on me. I now lived in the kind of place Robert always insisted was beyond my reach, only I had earned it legally. Robert's trial was a media circus. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Evelyn Harrison, his haughty wife, lost everything: the mansion, the jewels, the cars, all seized. The last I saw of her, she was a receptionist at a motel in upstate New York. Our eyes met briefly. She quickly looked away, her famous arrogance replaced by a hollow shame. Michelle's fate was the most unexpected. 3 weeks after the arrest, she came to me, a changed woman. She was signing the divorce papers, asking for nothing. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Joseph," she said, her voice filled with genuine remorse. "And I threw it away because I was just like him. I'm moving to Oregon to work at my aunt's inn, to learn what it means to lead an honest life." She had finally learned the lesson, but the tuition had cost her everything. For me, the scandal became a catalyst. With Harrison Development gone, the construction landscape of Boston changed. My company, Mason Construction, exploded, growing from a handful of employees to over 80. We took on the city's contracts, but we did it right. We paid fair wages, followed every safety code, and built a reputation on transparency. The Boston Globe ran a feature, From Bricklayer to Titan: How Integrity Rebuilt an Empire. The true reward, however, came not from wealth, but from purpose. We finished a community center in Dorchester that Robert had abandoned. At the dedication, an elderly woman named Rosa Martinez took my hand. "Mr. Mason," she said, tears in her eyes, "you hired my grandson when no one else would. You gave him a trade. You don't just build buildings, you build lives." In that moment, I understood the true difference between Robert's legacy and mine. He built for greed. I was building for good. A year after that fateful Christmas party, I was the keynote speaker at the Boston Chamber of Commerce annual dinner. I stood before 300 of the city's most powerful people, many of whom had witnessed my humiliation. "A year ago," I began, "a man punched me in the face for spilling a glass of water. His daughter, my wife, told me to apologize. Many of you were there. You saw a loser, a man who didn't belong." The room was dead silent. But what you witnessed was not my defeat. It was my liberation. It was the moment I stopped trying to fit into a world of corruption and decided to build a better one. I told them the whole story. Robert Harrison measured a man's worth by the label on his suit. He failed to see his character. Today he is in prison, and I am here, running a company built on the one thing he never had: integrity. The applause was thunderous. 3 years have passed. Mason Construction is a leader in New England. I bought the old Harrison mansion at auction and transformed it into a vocational training center for at-risk youth. Where there was once arrogance, there is now opportunity. Michelle, I hear, found happiness in a simple life in Oregon. And I found a peace born not from avoiding conflict, but from confronting injustice and building something better in its place. Final CTA. If this story of reversal and redemption resonates with you, and if you believe that character is the ultimate currency, subscribe to Twist and Revenge. We're dedicated to stories of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things by refusing to back down. Because the ultimate revenge isn't destruction. It's to build a life so full of purpose and success that your enemies become nothing more than a footnote in your own remarkable story.